we're fortunate we have two presenters today that are going to present little mini didactics for us. So first we have Dr. Weber, who is the ACT Early Ambassador for Ohio. She'll tell you a little bit about what that means. She's also a psychologist and the director of training at the University of Cincinnati in Cincinnati Children's Hospital USED and LEND program, and has fabulous knowledge to share with us around developmental monitoring and screening. So with that, Dr. Weber, I'm going to turn it over to you so that you can talk to us a little bit about how do we monitor development and have some of these conversations about development. And then we'll shift over and hear from John Kinzel, specifically related to some of those difficult conversations.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I pretty much title most of my talks around this topic, Acting Early, because it's really an active process that we want to always engage ourselves in thinking ahead on what we can provide for kids as well as their caregivers, whether it is even educating the child's pediatrician on things that can be done to act early and get them connected to the developmental services that they can be in need of to promote the most success. So let's see, there we go. I have no disclosures. Today I'm just, again, this quick little lecturette. We are going to talk about the understanding of screening and monitoring. For many of you, this is old news, but then hopefully have a little bit of discussion at the end around community resources maybe throughout the state that folks could benefit from. And I'll show you a few that our hub team has put together as well. In general, we recognize that developmental disorders impact physical development, learning, language development, and behavior, and those functional limitations in major life activities. And so what we're coming to find with these children is that for a long time, and in many states, we don't know if NAS or the subsequent disabilities and delays are being qualified as a developmental disorder by the county boards. And so that's part of our nationwide work, is to figure out how we can best promote NAS and then hopefully name a disorder after children leave the hospital following their treatment in the NICU or shortly after that, so that we can make sure that these kids are getting the services they need, just like a child with Down syndrome or autism. We do know that 1 in 6 kids aged 3 to 17 have one or more developmental disabilities in the country. And I think this number is probably going to go up given the likelihood of classifying children with prenatal exposures with developmental disabilities. We know that there's a lot of disparities in diagnoses, and we're seeing this a lot every day on the news, the discussion around systemic racism, and that plays out in our diagnoses. And minority children are at great risk for later diagnosis due to healthcare access, mistrust of healthcare institutions, English not as a primary language. I think this is even playing out in telehealth, where it's really difficult to connect at times and maintain internet connection for both an interpreter and the family. Non-citizenship and great fear of disclosures of non-citizenship for service provision at the county level and any interaction with the government. Lots of discrimination that we've talked about, and that's kind of why we're here, is to help dispel myths around addiction and substance use disorders. In general, low screening rates. We just obtained a grant, and it was really concerning to know that only about half of the children in the state of Ohio are receiving the screening that they should be receiving as of 2017. And this is by their primary care providers. In general, lack of cultural knowledge of developmental disabilities. Many cultures that we see even in our state believe developmental disabilities might be a condition that was something that came from God to basically punish the family member. And then ongoing stigma of disability and mental health issues. So in general, this is probably a review, but hopefully for some people, giving you information around learn the signs, act early can be new, and you can incorporate them into your practice. Just some basic terminology. Surveillance or monitoring is the ongoing process of recognizing children who might be at risk and following up on those. So we want to just constantly survey or monitor and make sure that folks are recognizing when a child might be having a developmental concern in a certain area. What we're finding with these kids is that the big 5 areas of development aren't necessarily always the ones that are blatantly obvious on a screening or survey tool. So screening is more of that standardized tool that many of you do in your early intervention or your preschool settings or your childcare facilities. But really what we're seeing oftentimes is these kids are really having a lot of dysfunction in executive skills. So those higher level planning, organization, inhibition of control and kind of control issues, as well as the sensory concerns. And those aren't gonna pop positive on cognition, language, potentially on fine and gross motor skills. So we have to be really kind of mindful of what these children are going to look like, and they may show up in the average range on screenings, but that doesn't mean that they're not having significant disabilities. And then as we talked about in the case, the evaluation then is what we need to get kids linked up to. That is a complex process to identify those specific developmental disorders. And oftentimes there is, a wait. And so we want to get kids referred as early as possible so they can be on those wait lists and get in as quickly as they can. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that children are monitored or surveyed at every health supervision visit. And we know this is happening in some areas and it's just not happening in others. Those specific standardized screening tests should be happening at 9, 18, and 24 or 30-month visits. And in the work we've done around Learn the Signs Act Early, we're finding in our state that pediatric providers are using really outdated standardized screening tools. So they may have still been using things that were being used back in the 90s. And so we really want to encourage up-to-date materials. Autism-specific screening should be done at 18 and 24 months. And then anytime concerns are elicited, we should trigger screening or referral. This is just a grid. It's a little hard to read, but developmental monitoring is everyone's business. Developmental screening is a formal process done by people who have professional and specialized training. And then what I wanted to share with you is a little bit about the Learn the Signs Act Early. And so I have this cute video. Hopefully it will. I will hit share computer sound and hopefully it will work. Michelle, I can see you, so if you can't hear it, can you hear it?
Learn the Signs
wonderful.
Act Early program has been very valuable for my teachers and my parents, and so we're excited to be able to utilize it and provide it to the community. We're using the pamphlets, we're using the online applications that we have, and we're also encouraging our parents to download the new app. And one of the best things, set aside from it being great resource information, it's all free. Having resources that are available that talk about milestone development and why it's important and how to track it and how to know when your child is reaching their milestones or not is critical. We're all on the same page, we're all on the same accord. We're using the same resources, we're having the same dialogue, we're using the same language when we're talking to people. So when I have my parents here and I'm talking to parents about milestones, they understand what I'm talking about because they're using the materials. Again, it bridges that gap between the school and the home. If we're all aligned and we're all working towards the same success for our children, monitoring the milestones and being able to determine when children need more support. You don't have to have a master's degree or a PhD to be able to read the literature and understand it. So we have parents who don't have high school diplomas, who didn't graduate, and to be able to give them some of your resources and say, hey, this is what we're doing here, you can read through this, and then we can put a plan in place to make the child be most successful. If both of us are monitoring his progress and his milestones collaboratively, then we'll have a successful outcome at the end of the day.
Great, so somehow that worked. Yay. So again, these surveillance or monitoring tools are free through the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which obviously through COVID-19, we've heard a lot about public health. And so this is an initiative that has been around about 14 years now. And as Andrea mentioned, I am the Act Early ambassador to our state in Ohio. And so I can be your liaison to get use these free materials or answer questions about them. I would encourage all of you to take out your phones at this point and download the free Milestone Tracker app. It's both on Google Play or App Store for iTunes, and you just Google or you just search CDC Milestone, and it will show up with a little purple baby. And it's a fantastic resource that you can get tips and activities. You can put in specific children that you're concerned about, and it goes up, it goes from 2 months to 5 years. I also have a little, oh, you can't see it. Ah, there we go. The little Baby's Busy Day is the 1-year-old board book, and these are really fantastic. You can order them directly from the CDC's website, but we can work together in getting you and your organization some of these. We have a 1-year-old book, a 2-year-old book, and a 3-year-old book, and then there's tips inside as well. So that's a nice, fun way to engage families. And then there on the bottom right of the screen, the Milestone Moments booklet is one of my favorite. It fits in a diaper bag really easily. And it goes through many areas of development as well as tips and tricks that families can promote development, and then things to think about, to be concerned, and share with the physician. What we do know from the research, got to bring in a little research here at the end, is that when children have developmental screening and developmental monitoring, it's best to get children the receipt of early intervention services. So and that's better than just screening alone, just monitoring alone, or neither. And unfortunately, there are many children in our country who are receiving neither. And so I always got into this work because I would work in Head Start centers, and I would see the walls at the beginning of the year and the celebration of all the kids got their dental screening, all the kids got their eye exams, all the kids got their hearing screenings, but there was never a success mentioned about their developmental screenings. And so that's kind of what prompted me to want to do this work. And I would love to see that be a common conversation that all early interventionists and child care centers and Head Starts have, is that we want to make sure we get these kids developmental screening as well. And because we know that up to 50% of them by kindergarten can have behavior and mental health issues, academic concerns, and just lack of healthcare access. We obviously are talking a lot about protective factors. And so having strong connections with loving caregivers, that stability, opportunities to interact with other children, which obviously COVID presents as a great difficulty, and opportunities to build independence can be really difficult with these kiddos who are impulsive and difficult at times. So we all know about Ohio Early Intervention. Many of you can, work for Ohio Early Intervention and can describe it much better than I can. We've also put some other resources to autism-specific indicators, some early childhood technical assistance that is nationwide, the Devereux Early Childhood Assessment information, and then these are Z-maps that we've created in the greater Cincinnati area up through kind of the Dayton-ish, and we'd love to add to it. Hopefully, if I click on one, it will take us directly there. Maybe I will have to reshare a screen. Are you guys seeing the Google map? No. Okay, let me do a new share, and let's try that. Now you're seeing it, correct? Okay, so ultimately what this is that, well, not when we have more. If you click on any one of these icons, you can see a little bit about those services. And so if you have services in your area to add, we would love to add them to this interactive map and just expand it out. And we find this is really helpful to just email out to families or care providers, even physicians' offices, to let them know, hey, you're looking for something in the Lawrenceburg, Indiana area, here you go.
And with that, we're going to shift to our second presenter for today, who is John Kinzel, who is, as we said, an early childhood mental health specialist and a lot of work consulting with Head Starts, and just has a lot of great experience, especially related to these difficult conversations. So he's going to talk us through how we can, support children and their families, and how do we do this in a way that's going to be the best that we can for all involved. So with that, John, I'm going to turn it over to you.
We're going to talk about having difficult conversations. This first screen is just about me. last point maybe is the most important one here. I have survived many difficult conversations. So that's what I bring to the situation here. I have nothing to disclose. And here are the learning objectives that we're going to try to relate this to NAS and to substance abuse. Although really we're going to talk more about difficult conversations in general, and hopefully identify some ways that we can survive them, that we can feel better about them, and feel more comfortable entering into difficult conversations. So what is a difficult conversation? You know, we've all had them. We've all tried to avoid them. We've all felt anxious about them. And we survived them, as I've said, one way or the other. So what is a difficult conversation in a formal kind of way? So here's a formal definition. You'll notice that I'm trusting you can read this yourself, so I'm not going to read it, but you'll notice there are key pieces here. Needs, wants, opinions. Perceptions are diverse. There's diversity. There's difference. Feelings and emotions are involved always in a difficult conversation, no matter what the topic. And often there is something at stake, our reputation, our feelings, someone else's understanding, something's at stake, and we are anxious about what the consequences of entering a difficult conversation might be. And I think that, you know, while we never really heard from this morning about how that difficult conversation about NAS and its sequelae was handled, I have a feeling that it was done well, and that and going in, there was some anxiety about the consequences of doing that. Say, hurting the feelings of that mom, or the mom drops out of treatment because she felt like her boundaries were crossed, or whatever. Feelings of guilt because I did something wrong and I pushed it too far. So there's always consequences that lead us to have this sense of hesitation, at best dread is probably likely. The reality is that we don't always know when a conversation is going to be difficult. Lots of times we do, like when we're going to share a difficult diagnosis with a family. We know that's going to be a tough one, so we can get ready for it. But other times, it may be that I'm talking to my neighbor who I've talked to many times before, but I notice that the political sign in their yard has a different name on it than the one in my yard. And that might come up. And that, these days, has led to a lot of difficult conversations. And some of those consequences of those difficult conversations have been pretty severe, right? If you've been paying attention to the news. So it could happen in our personal life. It could happen in our professional life. So we need to, I think, my advice anyway, is to be prepared for that possibility. If we can anticipate it, because it's clearly on a path we're on a path that's leading there, like the sharing of a diagnosis, we certainly can prepare for it. But being prepared in general for difficult conversations, being prepared in general for conversations is not a bad idea. So first advice I have is do what she said. Now, not only everybody here has been on the Echo from the beginning, but I'm referring to the she here is Mary Vicario. And Mary gave us an amazing presentation on self-care a number of sessions ago. And if you weren't here for that, I suggest, as Andrea has shared with you, you have access to those previous PowerPoints, and you can go back and at least read the advice that she had and the guidance. And she has some really wonderful ideas for taking care of ourselves. So the first step in having a difficult conversation is to take care of ourselves. Have a way to be mindful, to calm ourselves, to manage our emotions, to take deep breaths, to be able to be centered, So those kinds of things. All right. That's what she said, by the way. All right. The other thing that's part of that is tame your ego. You know, oftentimes when we get into difficult conversations, we have a real clear goal about what we think should happen in this difficult conversation. We're either trying to convince somebody to change their opinion, or we're trying to give somebody information that's for their own good. We're wanting to help somebody make a decision about their child, or about their life, or about who they vote for, or whatever it is that matches ours. That's ego. We can rationalize it and say, you know, science tells me this is the best thing. But in that conversation, we're prone to think literally that we know best. And that's just natural. That's the way our brains function. So we have to have that mindfulness stuff so that we can tame our own ego. So the Q-tip I'm talking about there, when I say Q-tip it, stands for quit taking it personally. All right. A difficult conversation is not just about you and how you feel and what might happen to you and all that kind of stuff. A difficult conversation, any conversation, is about you and the others involved in the conversation. And so what they say is not about you, it's about them. Right? That's where they're coming from. And it's hard for us to see that if we're really just under the control of our ego. So that's really why we do that point number one, that do what she said stuff, is so that our ego is minimized as a factor in this difficult conversation. So remember Q-tips, quit taking it personally. Then you can be a little more present, a little more open to what the other has to say, a little more willing to have give and take, and that can lead to much better outcomes and a much better survival state after the difficult conversation. So if you know what's going to happen, I mean, you know, you're going to sit down with this client or this patient or this family member, it can help to write down what you're going to say before you say it. Not that you'll read that as a script necessarily, but it'll help you get your ideas organized, help you get clarity about what your own thinking really is. You can do it a little more dispassionately, and so then maybe you can share that information a little more dispassionately. And then that will help you be more prepared too. I mean, surprises happen in difficult conversations. That's just part of the deal. So with our self-regulated now, we're more flexible, right? All that stuff we did in point number one is about getting us into our prefrontal cortex as much as possible. So we're rational. We are able to use our working memory. We can empathize more, because that's an executive skill, is to put yourself in somebody else's place. We can think about our own thinking, so that's good. And then you write it down and you've got it, and that'll be there. But if something comes you didn't expect, you're in your executive function there, your executive state, and so you can roll with it. It could be flexibility and able to move our focus from one thing to another better, and then focus in on what we want. All those things are executive functions. And then the last one is procrastinate not. If you're going to have a difficult conversation, it's going to be difficult if you do it this afternoon or if you do it next week. You're prepared now, do it now. Do it when you can. Putting it off tends to raise your own anxiety. And so it's really not helpful to put it off. So that's really all I have to say about point number 4 there. So here are some attitudes, and there's some redundancy here, I'll realize, but that's okay. What is it? Adult learning tells us we should hear things 5 times before they sink in. So I've probably already done that on some of these points. So, so the first one is be respectful. You know, these are basic kinds of things. But when we're in a difficult conversation, particularly when we're on social media, right, it's tough to be respectful. And unfortunately, we have models in our culture that support not being respectful. And we have more and more conversations, no matter which side one is on a particular issue, in which the comments and the statements are not respectful. It is difficult to come out the other side of a difficult conversation if we don't start with respect. So cultivating an attitude of respect and value for the other, whoever that other is, whether it's a client, whether it's a family member, whether it's your neighbor, whether it's somebody you meet on the street, that starting with that attitude of respect. And mindfulness helps this too, because it allows us to be in a bigger picture. And again, it allows our ego to be tamed. Be a learner. So this means starting with an attitude of trying to understand where the other is coming from. As we were just talking about that case presentation, there was some emphasis on getting to know what the mother of this child already knew. What is her understanding of her child's difficulties? Where does she think it comes from? What role does she think, what factors does she think were at play there? So we're learning about the other as a priority of convincing the other that what we know is the best and the right thing to do. That's, again, controlling our ego. I personally think that a lot of our difficult conversations end badly and seem like they're frustrating because we enter them believing we're going to change the other person. So I'd encourage you to let go of that. That's sort of an attitudinal thing too. If we go in with the goal of changing the other person, we're setting ourselves up for failure much of the time. Because remember that definition of difficult conversations? It's difficult because there's already a difference. There's already another person involved. There's already another strongly held opinion or belief or understanding. And if we start with the idea that we're going to change that, we're putting up a barrier ourselves. If we start with a position and an attitude of I'm going to learn as much as I can about where the other one's coming from, that very act of learning and listening and respecting the other person creates their openness to hearing what we have to say. And so it begins to break down some of those stumbling blocks that often are so huge in a difficult conversation. And so we try to be optimistic. We're going to go into this with our best attitude. We believe something positive can happen, and we believe that we're going to be at our best in this conversation, so that if nothing else, I'm going to have learned, I'm going to be respectful, I can feel good about what I took into this conversation, whether the other person ends up agreeing with me or not, or doing what I think is right or not. But I'm going to be brave enough that I'm going to tell about what the world is like as I see it. I'm going to name, for instance, NAS as a possible and even probable factor in the difficulties that your child is having right now. I'm going to speak my fact and speak my truth after I've already done these other things. So when it comes to me sharing what I believe and what I know and what I think, I'm not going to pussyfoot around that. I'm not going to soft pedal that. I'm going to be brave enough to say, here's what I think, and this is why, and this is what I've seen happen in other situations like this. And, here are the things that I know have been helpful to other people to think this through, or to get the help their child needs, or to cope with having a child with NAS, and to cope with the guilt of being the person that took the drugs that led to the NAS. So I'm not going to, when it gets to those kinds of things that I see as factual, and I think it's important, I'm going to be brave enough and truthful enough to put it out there. Being truthful and being brave is being respectful, because I'm being authentic. Pussyfooting around, using code words, not saying things clearly, mamby-pambying around shows diminished respect for the other person, as if somehow I have to take responsibility for them, that they can't protect themselves. And I want to communicate to the other that I value them and trust them. at least as much as I can. And so I'm going to be kind, because I know they too are another person. They are another person who doesn't like difficult conversations. They are another person that is worried about consequences. They are another person that has feelings. They're another person that has the right to what they believe. And they're another person that has the opportunity to grow. So I'm going to be kind to them because I want them to be kind to me. And I want them to be kind to other people. And I believe in the idea of parallel process, that if I'm kind to you, you're going to be a little more likely to be kind to somebody else. So frankly, that being kind is more than just getting us through this conversation. It's planting a seed. So those are the attitudes that my experience and my research suggest are important. And there are actions that we can do. So we're back to ego again here, because I think it's important, no matter how many letters we have to have after our names. And no offense to all you doctors out there who always introduce yourself. I'm Dr. Whitmer, whatever. It's nice that you're a doctor, but when you're in a conversation, particularly a difficult one, I suggest that we all forget about our expertise for the moment, set it aside and say, you know yourself best. I'm the learner here. Teach me what you know about your child. Teach me about your child. What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? What are your worries? What are your concerns about? What led you to have that opinion? Why do you think that's important? What do you think will happen if that takes place? What would you like to see? What are your goals? You know all those things better than I do. So I'm not going to tell you what I believe you think and tell you what's wrong with it. Even if it's a personal political conversation, I'm going to try my best. And I say all these things as if I did them all the time, by the way. Let me just make that truthful confession right now. I'm talking to you about optimal ways to prepare ourselves. And I also want to remind us at this moment that we're all human. So none of this is 100%, right? If we try to be perfect, we're dooming ourselves to failure. So I'm going to encourage you to let go of that one too. Doing our best. So I'm going to take that one down position, help me understand. I'm sure that's influenced by my lifetime as a therapist, but still, I think it has value in all these situations. So then I'm also going to be intentionally looking for and then call to the other's attention the times that we genuinely agree. Hey, you know what? We both love America. We both want the best for America in that political conversation. We may have completely different ways of going about that and completely different definitions of what America is. I can find those places of agreement, though. And if we can find those, then we have a little bit of stronger connection. And the stronger connection we have, the more it can tolerate the difficulty that makes this a difficult conversation. All right, your mom probably said this to you when you were a kid too. But God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, right? All right, so listen more than you speak. This is particularly tough for me. I'm sure all the people that have been in this echo session know how much I love to talk, and I'm unmuting myself more often than I should. I love to talk. When I'm in a difficult conversation, though, and I like to believe when I'm in an important conversation, I'm listening more because I want to put the focus on the other. And I know that I will, or I trust that I will have my opportunity to share. And I can fine tune what I say now to what I've learned from the other. So I'm not coming in with some monolithical statement, but rather something that is in response, hopefully in a sensitive way, to what they said. And so that makes it even more potentially meaningful to the other when they receive it. So we're going to utilize active and reflective listening. I'm sure I don't have to go very deeply into that. Hopefully most of you have had lots of exposure to this, but we're nodding, we're smiling, we're looking concerned at the right times. We're back before COVID, we might touch somebody in a gentle, appropriate way. Our body language is open and responsive. We're making decent eye contact that's respectful to the other person's tolerance for eye contact. We're identifying that we're kind of reflecting the content that the person says, and if we're really getting deep into this, we're reflecting the affect that we hear. You really feel strongly about that when you said this, because this is where you're coming from this childhood experience or whatever. So we're giving responses that are reflective in a deep, meaningful kind of way. But at least we're letting the other person know that we understood what they said, or we're asking clarifying questions. You use this term, and this is what it means to me. What does it mean to you? Do you know what that term NAS means? Do you know what sequelia means? I might slip into some kind of professional language or something. You know, we're checking it out with each other, but we're being factual and assertive. Assertive is different. It's kind of the mid ground between being aggressive and being passive. Being passive is giving the power to the other person. Being aggressive can be thought of taking power away from the other person. And being assertive means being sure of yourself, and in a way that's not demeaning or overpowering, but it's standing up for yourself.
Thank you so much to all of you for joining us today, and we hope to see you again in 2 weeks, where we start to delve specifically into those issues related to trauma and how we address that with our families.